Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to have to slow walk this one. This is intersectional.
What do you mean by that?
My deep reverence for movements and revolution and just radical change, radical thought is coming into context with my desire for unlimited humor.
You are being very politically correct of saying people think that birds aren't real right now.
It's radical thought.
It is radical thought. I'm mad, part of this show, we do so many serious episodes. We're covering protests in Iran. We're covering a whole bunch of serious things. And sometimes we get a topic that comes across our board that is just so perfect.
Feels good.
It feels good to just look at the lunacy of what's happening in the world. So let's really get deep.
Okay.
Into birds aren't real. What?
Well, let's start here. Birds.
How do you feel about them?
You know what? I've always thought they were real.
Oh, so you're a bird believer?
I'm a bird believer.
You're a bird believer.
I've been a bird believer, but I gotta admit to y'all, I never questioned it. You know what I'm saying? And then I started thinking stuff like, how close have I ever been to a bird? Really?
Well, look. Started in around 2016 by Peter Sindog, specifically, is that there's been a conspiracy theory that has been proliferating that birds aren't real. The birds aren't real movement has picked up with recently in Reddit, where we frequent, organized a march of a few 100,000. No, not 100,000 people. But there was too many people. There was objectively too many people at the birds. Even if it was 3 people, it would be too many people.
Yeah.
And what they say is that birds have actually gone extinct. The government has killed birds.
Word. Assassinated all the birds.
Assassinated
Avian
birds.
assassination. Elimination of all the birds. The CIA, but did you read why?
I did read why the CIA decided to murder all the birds and replace them, mind you, with spy technology.
Various bird-like drones.
Bird-like drones, spy bird-like drones.
But let's not skip over why, though. Because
we're having birds, too much fun with this.
Why? No such thing. Why did the CIA get beef for birds?
You're gonna have to walk me through that alley of the conspiracy.
Didn't get there.
No, I was too caught up on how do we know that these birds, the evidence. I was too caught up on the evidence.
See, that's why we got to slow walk this day.
Let's slow walk it.
So the CIA, they doing their job, right? Supposedly, this is the background, the context. The CIA has supposedly been doing their job, working hard to protect this country from threats, foreign and domestic. They driving to work every day, parking their cars, drinking their coffee, walking into work, and coming out with bird doo-doo on their cars. Yes.
So the statistic that floored me about this conspiracy theory is that they said 83% of bird droppings fall on cars.
See?
Ladies and gentlemen, that's wrong. I will say undoubtedly that is inaccurate.
I mean,
first of all, who's counting?
Second of all, there's a lot of places where there are birds, but no cars.
But most places that have birds have no cars, actually.
But that statistic might be true because the birds, they might have started this whole thing targeting the CIA and their cars. The CIA wasn't having it. This is America. We stand up for ours. So the CIA was like, ain't gonna be too many more birds out here.
So it's a bird beef that
It's a bird beef
that we've actually unraveled. What I understood about the theory, and part of me is very upset that I spent so much time reading about people thinking birds aren't real. That took a lot of my time, but I don't want to be dismissive, bro. And also, we're investigative journalists on the low. We do our due diligence. We spend our time. We do our research.
I didn't take my job that seriously before this case.
Yeah, this. So
This one hardened
the
me.
Iran woman protest last week doesn't compare to the research you did.
I mean, that story was humbling, and it made me take an approach that even I think more emphasized that, like, nah, I'm not a journalist, dude. I don't have the weight to throw that around. But this case was like, nah, we're gonna get to the bottom of this.
We did spend definitely too much time investigating this. However, it's interesting because the birds are not real theory actually stems from the early 60s. So apparently, right, is that the birds not being real are part of the JFK assassination. It all fits into why.
Why do they all go back?
Why do all conspiracy theories go back to JFK? I don't understand.
I think it was one of those things where there was just so much other random things happening at the time when he was murdered that they can't all be nothing.
So they can't. So the bird droppings are actually spy technology too. So what we see as bird droppings, they're white, which means they're an adhesive and have some form of a tracking device on them. Is the theory that has been presented by Peter Msindog.
Yeah, got you. Well, Peter went deep. All right, Peter unearthed a whistleblower, Eugene Prince, who used to work at the CIA, but he had to leave because he wasn't with the murder of all the birds.
He wasn't with the murder of the birds. 3 billion birds.
So he was.
It was the number I came across.
Hey, dude. Bird aside.
I'm glad you brought up that Eugene fellow because I also listened to an interview with Eugene. Eugene says that there was photographic evidence. There was all sorts of evidence of exchange that he had, but he destroyed it because it was way too inflammatory. You know, it would have upset the natural order of this world for us to realize that beloved birds, sparrows, pigeons, tweeties,
like ran out of birds. Definitely ran out of birds, yo. But like,
look at the birds I know: pigeons, doves.
Yeah, no swans in there.
I didn't have a swan in there.
Come on, man. No cranes.
Peter, are swans also part of the birds that don't? Or which birds? They say pigeons.
You see,
pigeons, the rats in the sky.
Rats in the sky. Actually, pigeons are very important to social processes. We got to respect pigeons. They do a lot for ecosystems, I think.
You know, actually speaking about real history, not this nonsense. In China, when they did the first 5-year revolution, part of what the propaganda was to get rid of all the sparrows, because there were a bunch of sparrows, right? And they were also populating the sky, which made it unbecoming. So there was a huge campaign, killed millions of sparrows, which then broke the ecosystem where locusts were able to then eat on the plants in there, which stemmed one of the greatest famines in China's history. You know, an estimated 5 to 15 million, 5 to 40, because no one actually has the numbers from that time, died of starvation during this time due to the sparrow campaign.
See?
Real history.
And history is important because it provides context but I think that alone is enough to be like, the CIA probably didn't kill all the birds. If you can't kill all the sparrows without an ecological disaster, you probably can't kill all the birds.
This would be my question to the birds aren't real guys, and this is to our Reddit community, and I hope this makes it directly to them. You're wrong, but here's my question, right? When birds are left to their own birdly adventures, are they programmed to still do bird stuff? Or are they still spying?
Dang, because now you got me thinking about like, what are the robot birds programmed to be doing during like a National Geographic bird documentary?
Do you see?
Are they just like, do they program these birds to act like birds for the doc?
You see, and this is the problem with these sorts of conspiracy theories, right? This is the problem with it. But this actually, like, it was an interesting week of protesting because we saw the birds aren't real protest at first, and we're like, this is hilarious. We gotta cover it. This is great.
It's good.
This is right up our alley. Yes, please, right? But then we saw a lot of other videos coming up of people protesting. We saw particularly some young girls pouring milk out. You're seeing people who are spray painting luxury vehicles, spray painting Aston Martin, spray painting a whole bunch of Ferraris. There's a lot of these, and a lot of them are young people, these protests that are coming up. But the question is, like, you saw recently the young girls that threw paint on the soup on the Mona Lisa and then try to stick themselves. Anyone trying to stick themselves to something.
Throw soup on the Mona Lisa.
But like,
it was Van Gogh's sunflowers, but I feel.
But like the Mona Lisa was also maybe look, they going at that art. This is what's happening.
I think this is so yeah, like you said, we read the birds aren't real headline and we're like, let's eat for sure. But I think it's the most interesting part of it. Like, it's funny for sure, but the most interesting part of it is kind of this question around, like, when you satirize something, like, how well do you have to, like, what's the responsibility you have to the thing that you're satiring, especially if that's something that in some spaces is to be respected, right? Like, is it disrespect? Because this is like, Birds Aren't Real is a satirical protest, right? It was organized to be a satire. So I think that's hilarious, but I also think when you amplify these elements that are real things in protest, then people have this, it makes it hard for people to differentiate between the satire and the real thing. I'll put it like this, right? You remember Scary Movie? Those movies that were making fun of like Scream and all the slasher movies. You ever try and think back about like a scene and you couldn't remember if it was in Scream or if it was in Scary Movie? You know what I mean? That's kind of what I think is the interesting thing about this protest, because if you look at two headlines, girls threw soup on Van Gogh for climate change and birds aren't real, you could think that kind of a similar thing is happening behind those two stories if you don't read them, just like outrageousness.
Yeah.
But they're two very different things. And I think, what's the role of satire in confusing that whole mix?
I mean, like, look, you know, I can only speak from my personal experience. If somebody came up to my family's gallery and threw soup over an art piece and then try to glue themselves to the drywall claiming that climate change, it would be frustrating, you know, and it would be out of place. So it's the same thing where you see people throw blood on celebrities, throw powder on celebrities. There does seem to be, like, what do you do with that energy of frustration of a problem, you know, is what a lot of people ask themselves, because these people are frustrated and they want to have an outlet to be able to get other people to understand their frustration. But what I would say is that, look, when you make yourself the subject of the change, then the focus is not on the change anymore. And I think there's so much that can be done by people in the right light, as opposed to being destructive, that can allow for like some form of acknowledgement of what it is that they're protesting for. So I don't think you have to throw soup on the Mona Lisa. I don't think people are going to see that and be like, oh, you know what, these climate change girls are right, we need to think about this more. I don't think that's what's happening. So then it raises the point, like, are you for climate change or are you for attention? When you go to Walmart and you empty the cartons and you pour it through, like, the line of like, people don't realize where the line of protest should actually start. You drove there in what did you drive there in? The clothes you're wearing, that's all petroleum. You know, the items that you're using to communicate and post are from cobalt that's been stolen from Africa. So what are we protesting?
Well,
it reeks of entitlement. It reeks of entitlement.
I guess, so my question, I think, then becomes, well, but then who gets to decide what is important enough to protest about, and who gets to decide how people should protest?
Yeah, that's why I'm saying this being destructive, right? And this is where the fine line is, because like there's been instances where being destructive is a precursor to large social change. You look at Arab Spring, you look at what happened in the June 16 marches in South Africa. Like there's many instances. The saying is blood alone changes the wheels of history, right? But it's I think there's a line there, man. There's a line there. Just doing things for the sake of attention is, I think, what separates those things.
Some people might say that you would need to bring attention to these movements, right? I think some people might say, if I go stand outside with a picket sign of, this big oil company's headquarters, the news ain't coming. They're not going to cover me. They're not going to ask me. They don't care about why I'm here. But I bet you if I go to somewhere that they care about and I throw soup or paint or something that they see as a symbol of their status that they do value, a lot of times people, I think, are frustrated because we value these symbols of status more than we value people. Now I have your attention. Now there's a microphone in my face and somebody wants to know, like, why did you do this? What are you here for? You didn't care when I just had a picket sign. You didn't care when I was writing my blog. You didn't care when I was just posting on social media. So I think from the perspective of, I think bringing attention and awareness to issues is a more and more difficult thing to do in such a noisy era of media. But I think it is an important part of that social change. So I would be very hesitant to tell people that if you're doing something to bring attention, that's not real protest or activism.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. It's a bit of a difficult one. But I do think that when you begin to inconvenience the life of other people, and I'm so glad our producer brought this picture up, right? So this is a monk in Vietnam, during the Vietnam War, set himself ablaze, to his death, sat there on fire, right? This was a protest. He sat there, he dressed himself on fire in order to protest for peace. That's how much it meant to this man to be able to do that. People stood around, they watched it happen. They say the man never uttered a single cry throughout that whole period. He just sat there burning to his death. That is the more extreme form, but the intention behind that action is it makes sense. This, I see the intention behind it. There's a thoughtfulness in making sure that the message is at the heart of this, not the destruction being at the heart of it. So going to Van Gogh and throwing soup on the picture for climate change because too much attention is being put into art, that's faulty logic.
Is it?
I don't think it correlates. I just think you want attention.
But I think that's the point.
No, I don't think you're saying the issue needs attention. I think you want attention.
I think it's hard to assign that to people, especially if they have if they have a next step, if they have actually, I'm bringing attention to this for climate change. We're actually against these oil companies. We actually want you to put legislation in place to block them from continuing to affect the environment the way they do. I think that if there is a next step, I don't know if I'm so quick to judge somebody for bringing that attention to them. But I also supremely disagree with the idea that it's not okay to inconvenience other people as you protest. Like, I think a lot of the whole point of protest is that people go about their day-to-day lives not caring what other people are dealing with and going through. And unless you inconvenience them, unless you make it their problem, they're never going to care. So I actually think the whole point of protest is to make other people aware. And a lot of times you do have to be outside of a building. You have to make a lot of noise where people don't like noise. You got to, sometimes when they wanted to save some of the schools in Chicago, they had people chaining themselves to the desks, right? So to say, we value this thing that you're trying to tear down, right? I think the idea that you can't inconvenience people in protests is not true to the spirit of movements that have given us the rights that we have today.
That's fair. And I'm willing to come down on that, right? for specifically the social media activists. Put on a mask. Like cover yourself, right? Cover yourself. Don't draw attention to you in these actions, right? If you want to throw soup on the Mona Lisa and then stick yourself to it, do it anonymously. Like cover, make sure that it's not, we can't see your face, and don't post it on your page and that type of thing.
You won't let me do all my activism anonymously. I'll be mad trying to be anonymous out
Miles,
here.
you are you're not throwing soup on the Mona Lisa, dog.
But I think why do you tell me to do that? Right? It's because people need to see the representation of people that care as human beings, right? Like, and I think as much as we often go too quick to hero worship of people that we believe are the heads of movements, I think there's also something to be said for seeing somebody that you identify with and relate to taking power and like doing something, right? People want to go out and meet with other humans that are like-minded. That's why Birds Aren't Real became a thing. Like, sure, is it a real issue or not? But like, people want to know that other human beings feel the way that they feel, and they want to come and express themselves in that space. So I think it's important that I feel what you're saying. Don't do it for the clout. Do it for the movement. Put the movement at the center of it. But I think we're at a time where people ain't really, that George Floyd thing, we was hyped. It was trendy for a moment, but it's fading. And now how do real movements, people that really want to accomplish things and get real things done, get back enough in that spotlight to say, hey, this is still happening. Still ain't no water in Flint. Now ain't no water in Jackson. You know what I mean? Like, how do you get to the forefront of that without being incredibly intentionally disruptive?
Well, listen, being incredibly disruptive isn't only reserved for conspiracy theorists, as we'll learn.
True.
Liz Truss
was
incredibly destructive.
Quickly.
Very, very quickly. Current news.